Hey, deserving listeners. So I'm recording this intro after I recorded this whole episode. And I want to provide a caveat that in this episode, I am responding to 3 different emails about online bullying. And in the episode, and particularly at the end, I am getting into topics and stories that I know I have already talked about on the podcast or in videos on YouTube. So if you don't want to hear me repeat those kinds of sentiments or stories or explorations, feel free to fast forward or skip this episode. I would say the first 45 minutes, I don't think I'm really repeating much, but I just got done recording the tail end of this episode, and I stopped recording, and I was just about to edit all of it and post it, and I thought, I think I'm repeating stories, and the reason why I do repeat these stories is because I'm not emotionally resolved on these things yet, and I only get a chance to really talk about it occasionally, or I don't take care of myself enough by talking about it or healing from it enough. But I, as a lot of people, will process things emotionally and heal and figure things out and make meaning by talking about things, the way that we do in therapy. And I'm worried that I'm going to bore the shit out of everyone with the same stories. So listen with care along those lines. All right, let's get to the episode. Hey, deserving listeners, it's just me today. I thought I would answer some of your emails. I compiled a few emails that had to do with online bullying. So let's read the first one here. Anonymous patron, she writes, "Hey, Dr. Honda, a while back, as you were receiving a lot of backlash for your trial coverage, I really felt for you." Just chiming in here. Well, thanks, anonymous patron. That's very kind. And a lot of people were very, very kind to me, and I couldn't have gone on without you, seriously. I wouldn't be here talking to you, I don't think, if you weren't there. Going on. Recently, I listened to an excellent podcast that just came out called Who Trolled Amber. It suggests that a very large portion of online hate around the trial was actually part of a sophisticated bot campaign. The bots were able to create the appearance of a group consensus and draw upon the biases of real people, causing them to join the hate. I figured given what you have gone through, this would be validating. And I would also be interested in the psychology that leads to the bandwagoning effect. Just chiming in here. Yeah, I appreciate that, anonymous patron, but I don't think that at least a good portion of the attacks during that time to me, and others for that matter, I wasn't the only one being attacked, I mean, there was a lot of toxicity, and, I was getting a very small portion of it. But I know that a lot of it was not bots. There were patrons who were participating in it. And I, had conversations with these people back and forth. So unless it's some sort of early version of AI in 2022, then it's, it was real people. Might some of it had, been bots? Yeah, maybe. But, and might that have affected things? Maybe. Might a small, if the bots weren't there, the theoretical bots weren't there, might the few people who were angry at me, and, the vast majority of people who were attacking me, like 99.9%, they only knew me from the trial reaction that I was making, and therefore didn't know my full position on all the various different topics that I have talked about. So they only had a little bit of information to go off of and extrapolated from that in ways that were clear that they were not fans of mine prior to the trial, and were accusing me of things that I had been vocally demonstrating I wasn't that, anyway, you get my point. So, is it validating? I don't know. If someone could demonstrate that what I was going through was significantly affected by bots, then yeah, I guess it would be. I don't know. It's hard to say because some of it was real, and I know that. I mean, there were YouTube channels that were against me, content providers, and these weren't bots. These were actual ongoing content providers that had me literally on a hit list of content providers that they were encouraging or telling all of their followers to attack. I was on a blacklist of people that, honestly, I don't understand why I was on the list. I was on a list of mainly law YouTubers who were very much against Amber Heard, and I did not find myself to be against Amber Heard. I mean, I suppose if you took just some of the things I was saying, then it could be interpreted that way. But I know that in my heart and mind, I did not know enough from the trial to have any sort of opinion, because they had witnesses and themselves were saying a wildly different story, and some of it could be true, none of it could be true, all of it could be true. I would say that, and so I was just providing my clinical opinion about things that I had seen in real life as a clinician, and was wondering if that's what we were seeing in the moment. I'm smart enough, and I've been around the block enough to know that watching a trial between two individuals who have every reason in the world to lie and spin, and have a lot of people on their payroll who are also lying and spinning or biased. I'm smart enough to know that everything we saw is, it's just hard to know what really happened, right? But yeah, so I didn't know why I was on these lists, but these were real people that were attacking me, and so I appreciate that you're trying to find something to validate me, but I don't know if that does. Going on with your email, I think there is a growing group of people who have had some kind of cancellation trauma from being exposed to massive public shame and criticism. Having had proximity to a person who was once the subject of something like that many years ago, I am still haunted by the emotional damage that I witnessed. I've seen public figures who have weathered this kind of thing have pretty substantial changes of beliefs and behaviors following the cancellation event, usually not for the better. Just chiming in. Yeah. I think we can identify at least a handful of examples of that where they were more moderate in their points of view and were canceled or attacked, and it's emotionally really hard. They don't talk about it, but it shows in their content, and they become toxic content providers. Yeah, I think that's an astute observation, and we don't see it. And I think a lot of the content providers don't even know that it's happening to them. I think that they think that their position is just getting more vocal. I think they would say, well, I always thought this, but I was holding back, but now I don't give a shit, and I'm just going to tell it like it is. But in reality, what happened was that as they were being attacked, they were in high distress and really, really scared and really, really hurt and really, really spiraling due to the exaggerated attacks. It's one thing, people criticize me all the time or disagree with me all the time. I love that kind of thing. I'm totally fine with people disagreeing. I'm used to it as a person, as a therapist, as a professor. I tell my students, if you disagree with me, speak up, because let's talk about it. Maybe I'm wrong. It's also an opportunity to help me clarify my teaching practices. Maybe I'm not explaining it right, or I'm wrong, or I misspoke or something. But tell me, because I'll never punish you. In fact, I'll be really happy that you said it, because in all likelihood, there's others that are thinking the same thing. I'm okay with that. People in the YouTube comment section will disagree with me. I'm totally fine. Be like, hey, that's not, if I'm making a reaction video and someone's like, hey, Dr. Anna, that's not how I saw it. This is how I interpreted it. I am totally, obviously fine with that, because as we all understand, my take or my reaction to things is just mine. It's not the reaction. And I 100 billion% understand that everyone is going to have a different take, and that's okay. It's like watching a movie and 10, with 9 other people, and 3 people hated the movie and 3 people loved it and 4 people were meh. I mean, how can everyone have a different reaction? Well, we all understand that, but we have a really hard time accepting that. If you loved the movie and someone else hated it, sitting right next to you, there's this battle that ensues, and it's just like, well, I think when you understand that you just have a particular interpretation of your experiences, and everyone has a different interpretation, that of course there's going to be differences. It's okay. But it's when people attack me and make assumptions, they'll say, oh, typical guy biased against women. Because the reason, the person reacting to me was, now maybe I am biased against women, but there's a different way to say it. And plus, I'll talk about the fact that I have bias. We all have bias. I'm okay. Like if someone said, hey, Kirk, I disagree with this, and I wonder if this is a bias that you have, maybe about gender. I'm okay with that. But just this assumption, you know how people talk on the internet. And what do you say to that? How do you prove a negative, right? How do you say, no? And I've gotten better at it. Like if someone had said that, and people do, like, oh, typical man who's a misogynist, I'll say, if they identify what they're talking about, I'll say something like, hey, I appreciate what you're saying. And yeah, as a man, I do have bias, and I do have privilege, and I do have blind spots and ignorance. And I strive to understand that, and to account for that, and to listen and understand other groups of people, whether it's women or black people or old people or whatever. I am always trying to learn. And here's where I was coming from when I said that. But maybe I'm wrong. Feel free to disagree. So, I don't know if that's the best thing. Meanwhile, when I'm typing that out, my hands are shaking, my heart is racing, I am thrown into hours of distress that is at least kind of there in the background. It's hard. So for other content providers, whether it's YouTube or radio or TV, pundits, they will start out as more moderate, and then they get attacked, and they go through what I imagine to be the same feelings that I go through, that everyone goes through, but they're in denial of it, and they just they funnel all of that energy into anger and revenge, and they do what they do that we see. So going on with the email, if we can now use bots to put a finger on the scale of public opinion, we need better tools to dissuade us from using online group consensus to form opinions. There is a sort of cyclical climate of fear that plays into this that I find very dangerous. Thank you for your hard work. It's very appreciated. End of email. Well, thank you, anonymous patron. Yeah, in some ways, it's only going to get worse, right? Because with AI and large language models and cheap computers that you can hook up to the internet, that you can have an AI, the dead internet theory and all this kind of stuff, and how it'll be able to trick everyone into thinking that they're a real person, because the ways that you can detect if they're a real, in the past, you could click on their account and see if they have other kinds of indications of a real person. But more recently and increasingly in the future, it'll be harder and harder to tell, right? So, yeah, that's one angle. But the way that I see it, I think, I don't know, you get old and you see patterns and you see cycles. And I have seen this before, even before the internet. In the 80s, there was a really big push to educate people, and particularly kids, that advertising and marketing is not necessarily accurate or true or trustworthy. And it might sound ridiculous that you'd have to tell people that, but back then we were still kind of emerging out of the ignorance of our society regarding marketers and advertising, where you could have a cigarette company in the 60s say that Lucky Strikes are good, Lucky Strike cigarettes are good for you, and that medicated menthol cigarettes are invigorating and they'll cure the common cold. I don't know what the claims were, but there were a lot of claims like that today we would look at, and even without a background in medicine, you would just be extremely suspicious. I mean, the cigarette thing, as we all know, but like if you're scrolling through Instagram or Facebook, which by the way is just filled with ads these days, and it makes it almost unbearable. In fact, it does make it unbearable. I don't go to Facebook anymore because of the ads and the suggestions of all the goddamn pages. It's like, stop suggesting all these. I just want to see my friends from high school and my extended family members, like, just, show me a couple ads, but don't show me ads for other pages on Facebook. Anyway, so, say you're scrolling through and you see an advertisement for something like a supplement that is purporting to cure COVID or something. I don't know. I'm sure that wouldn't be allowed, but you know what I'm saying. And they are saying that, and I'm guessing most people would, at the very least, be very suspicious of that claim. Whereas in the past, there was less suspiciousness because we hadn't experienced the full onslaught of advertising yet, and hadn't had a number of instances of being burned by it, And so there were campaigns, and there was awarenesses, and there was teaching, and there was talk, and there were experiences, and we emerged out of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s with, in my observation, a greater understanding of the deceptiveness of marketers. And then when Photoshop came along and other kinds of photo manipulative tools or editing tools, and I remember when it first came out, people worried that we would never know if a photo was real or not. And it felt like the way that it feels today, where AI is really coming into its own. When Photoshop first became a powerful tool, like I'm guessing in the late 90s-ish, early aughts, there was a lot of doom talk of you'll just never know. And a politician could make all these fake pictures and convince anyone of anything. Marketers could convince any individual can just make any photo. Like they could Photoshop the president of the United States having sex with someone, and then it'll cause chaos and we'll go to war and our society will fall apart. Hearing that today, it sounds ridiculous because Photoshop has been around for a long time, and yet it didn't bring down our society, and we didn't go to nuclear war because of it. And there were problems. It's not like Photoshop was harmless. It's caused tremendous harm. But over time, we adjust. We learn as a society that you can't necessarily trust a photo, particularly if it's trying to say something. If you just see a photo, like your friend texts you a photo of them, having a picnic because they're just like, hey, look at me, I'm having a picnic. Then, you think, well, I guess it might be photoshopped, but it doesn't really matter. So you'll just take it as it is. But if you get if you see a photo that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Or if like Putin releases a photo that shows that the Ukrainian army is killing children, and there's this grainy photo, I think most people would say, well, who knows what is really happening? Maybe, but there's a high chance that photo is photoshopped. So, now, do we have a problem with fake news, as they call it, or manipulative, false stories? Yeah, but our society hasn't completely fallen apart in the same way that today, do we have false advertising, deceptive advertising, and are they allowed to get away with it sometimes? And are there problems from it? Yeah, there are countless cases today of advertisers and other marketers lying to people and harming them. But we overall manage, and we overall know the difference. And we have a system in place of lawsuits and laws that need to be better and more robust, but are there to regulate this and protect the citizens and consumers. It could be better, of course, but when you're old like me, you remember hearing people talk about how Photoshop was the end of civilization. I mean, again, it sounds silly, but people thought that. People thought that, not the written word, like books, were going to be the end of civilization because it eliminated the spoken storytelling tradition or other kinds of things that they were worried about, Or when the phonograph came out, it's like, So there's always change, and it's not always for the better, but in all likelihood, as we head into the next phase of the internet where AI will be out there, it's already out there, but it'll be more and more out there. I don't know, check in with me again after 20 years, but I'm waiting and seeing, and the talk of how this will be the end of our society, because it seems possible, right, that you could have like Putin himself, right? He could just get a bunch of programmers in Russia to create AI that would be very convincing and very effective, and sway the American public in a direction that would benefit him or would destroy our country, cause a civil war or something. And, it's possible. And I've seen the movies and I've read the think pieces, and they feel very similar to me as other kinds of past panics. And I suspect that if we just keep talking about it and keep, spreading the word and, advocate for the government to pass laws and have regulations and lawsuits that are possible so that we can push back, and government agencies to protect us, I imagine that we'll get down the road somehow. We'll get through this. But, I can't predict the future. All right, let's take a break. We get back. Some more emails. All right, this next email is from annual patron and YouTube member Shien. They say, "Hi, Dr. Honda. You've mentioned that folks should be aware of how often the negative content online is generated by a handful of individuals." Just chiming in here. Yeah, research has found that there is a greater percentage of psychopaths and sadists online who comment much more often than others. So not only are there a greater percentage of commenters who are psychopaths and sadists, but they also will comment much more often. I think, or maybe it's just that, maybe it's that, I can't remember the research not in front of me, but the bottom line is that there's a fairly sizable minority of comments that are online that are perpetrated by psychopaths and sadists. That's a much greater percentage than the percentage of psychopaths and sadists in society. Anyway, so going on here. As a result, I thought you might find this clip validating to watch. Just chiming in here. I watched the clip. It's from a YouTuber named Mista. Anyway, going on. In it, a VTuber figures out how to IP ban a person who sends hateful donations to prevent them from sending more hate. So just chiming in here. I don't know how that would work, but from the sound of it, this YouTuber figured out how to identify individual IPs of the people that were donating during a live stream, and the hateful person was donating so that their hateful comments would be seen by the YouTuber. I think that's how it goes. And the YouTuber figured out how to figure out IPs and then block those IPs and going on. And from doing so, he then realizes that the same person had been responsible for the vast majority of all the hateful donations he's ever received. I appreciate when you help contextualize that belligerent negative attacks are often by one person, as it changes the perception of a crowd of people with negative opinions to one loud person with negative opinions who has time and resources to pretend to be a crowd of people. It's insightful and also reminds me to feel empathy for a person suffering from distortions. End of email. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about this. And yeah, I mean, what I do, I don't really get much hate. I don't even get much disagreement from people. The kinds of things that I talk about, like with the trial, about halfway through or towards the end of doing that whole series, because I made like 65 hour-long episodes. And toward the end of that, I saw it through to the end, but I said to myself, I'm never doing anything like this again. It's not useful enough to society to justify the toll that it's taking on me. And I don't know, the thing that was happening at the time was I was at the height of my fame and popularity just before, according to metrics and whatnot, I was at the height just before the trial. And then during the trial, I skyrocketed in fame and fortune. To be honest, I was making a lot of money relative to other times. The most I guess I've probably ever made, per hour or per day or something. And I, just told myself it's not worth it. I don't need more money. I'm with where we're at right now. If I just sort of sustain this, I can pay my bills. Everything's fine. So, but it was mildly tempting, and I could see other people who don't have, the thing that I could rely on was the people in my personal life, and also a clear purpose to make the world a better place. Whereas other people don't necessarily have a purpose, or their purpose is to make as much money as possible and to be as famous as possible. And so when they're presented with a why in the road, they take the one that involves more fame, which involves more pain for them, which can lead down these other roads that we were talking about earlier. But anyway, so for me, I don't really, since the trial, I don't really get much in terms of negativity. But when I do, what I do to reassure myself is to look at the like ratio on YouTube. And that's just one way. Because, plenty of you are listening to this on your your podcast app or on Patreon or something. But on YouTube, there's a like to dislike ratio that I think, wait, can everybody see it? I'm not sure, but I can see it. And what the table will give me is like a percentage, right? It'll say like you have, of all the people who clicked like or dislike, here is the percentage that was likes. And I typically have a like percentage of like 97, 98%, regardless of what I'm talking about. And it is surprising sometimes when I will read the comments in the comment section, or, I get a flood of emails or something. And I'm like, oh my God, the like ratio on that episode must be like very low, like 10% or at least 50%, And then I'll look at the episode, it'll be like 96%. It's not like my typical 98. It's like, oh no, it's at 96. And I'm thinking, huh. And then I think about myself, about how when I watch stuff on YouTube or I'm listening to a podcast, and I'm trying to more often now because of this, but I almost never comment. I did up until recently. I wouldn't even click the like button. Lately, I have been, because I want the content provider to have just another vote that I'm saying, yeah, even if I'm not like blown away by the episode, I'll just be like, hey, thanks, thanks for putting that out there. At least a couple minutes of that was worthy. And so there's a little up thumb, it'd be like walking down the street and there's a busker singing a song, and you put $1 in their bucket, or you smile and nod or something, or when they're done with a song, you clap, and then you continue on with your day. In the real world, I feel like we understand that, but when it comes to the internet, I think we need to be taught that. And even though I fully understand how this feels from the other side of things, I have to remind myself, make sure, because it feels anonymous, but it's not anonymous. It's just on the internet, I mean, it's anonymous, but it's not like we're inhuman. We're still humans on the internet anyway. So now, I'm not saying that when I get negative feedback and I look at the like ratio and it's 96%, I don't disregard the negative feedback. But it puts it into context, because most people just are fine with things. Like most listeners to the podcast, most listeners on YouTube, most viewers on YouTube of my channel, they're watching it and they're like mildly enjoying things and half paying attention. I mean, I'm joking, but or they really dig it, but they're not necessarily going to comment that they really dig it, and that's fine, but they will like it, right? They'll hit a little like button. So it puts it into context that it can be really distorting as a content provider if you just read the comments, right? Like if I get a comment that's really upset at me, and there's like 50 upvotes, I immediately think, oh my God, there's 50 people who are really angry at me. That's really horrible. And then I look at how many people saw the video, how many people clicked on it, and it's like there's, 50,000 people that watched the video. So what's that percentage? That's like 0.1%. Am I right? So 50,000, yeah. So that's 0.1% are angry at me. That's almost non-existent. If you think about if you have 50,000 people in a stadium and, the 75% are smiling and clapping their hands or whatever, and then spread out throughout the entire arena, there are 50 people that are angry at me. Those 50 people I wouldn't notice it, right? But the way that comments work and the way that people typically will comment is that those 50 people will, it's sort of like you're at a concert and those 50 people are given backstage passes and, or they're the only people that come up to the stage after the show and they all agree that you're an asshole. Meanwhile, everyone else is going home and saying that was a good concert, It doesn't mean the 50 people are wrong or discountable. It just puts it in the context, right? But I just don't. I've given this a lot of thought, and I've talked with a lot of other content providers, and so these two emails. One person saying, it's bots, so maybe that would be comforting to you. Another person is saying that it might be comforting to you to know that these groups of people that are angry at you might actually just be one person. And what I'll say is that I've given this a lot of thought because there's a lot of different other ways of seeing it, right? Like I've heard it all. Hey, if you're not making waves, then you're not making real content. You're taking too many, you're being too safe, right? You can't please everyone, right? If you're not pissing someone off, you're not doing it right. Or don't read the comments, or those people are jealous, or they're just trolls, or they're crazy. 50% of the world has an IQ below 100, or on the bell curve of sanity, you're going to get some people at one end of the spectrum. There's all these kinds of statements, or let it roll off your back, or at least they're commenting and they're driving up the algorithm. I'm just trying to think of all the things that I've heard, and there's all these techniques and all these emotional regulation strategies, and I've given it a lot of thought, and my conclusion is that we are just not made to handle this. It's not natural. It's like, I'm trying to think of another situation like this. Like it's potato chips and cookies and ice cream. If we're left to our own devices, many of us would just eat potato chips, ice cream, and cookies, and candy bars and stuff, right? But that will take its toll. It will feel right in the moment, but overall, it will be bad for us, dietarily and physically, right? And so, at least, I'm simplifying it, but you know what I'm saying. I'm sure there are diets that involve those things, and if you have the right kinds of things, it'll be fine. But you get what I'm saying. So just because something feels right, or it feels natural, or it feels like the right thing to do, doesn't mean that our bodies can handle it. And now that we have the technology to give everyone as many, as within reason, right? If you're middle class and you have enough money to spend on groceries, you can have ice cream and candy bars and cookies and as many potato chips as you want, or at least a lot of it, right? And the same is true about making content on the internet. If you have a certain amount of an audience, and you can make as much content as you want, and people can comment as much as you want, but it's a new development due to technology that we can do this, right? That we can reach this many people and that they can all comment. And that has an effect on us that, I'm glad it exists, obviously, but psychologically and emotionally, in the same way that physically we can't have potato chips and ice cream and cookies all day long, we also physically and emotionally and psychologically cannot handle that amount of feedback. Because for me, I'm in one of the best positions as a content provider in that the vast, vast majority of the comments that I get are neutral or positive. So it's easy for me to look at all that and say like, well, it's pretty rare that someone will say something negative. And by the way, if someone's really negative, like they call me a pussy or something, like that doesn't bother me at all, because it's so far gone, right? That it just is laughable. But it's more of when it seems like the people are people I could relate to, and yet they are very angry at me or they're very upset for something that I said, or something they believe that I said, or something. Anyway, so I believe, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's purporting this, right? That constitutionally and evolutionary wise, we're just not set up for this. It's a very new thing. If you think about life without the internet and life before the internet, feedback was rare. You almost never got feedback about anything. You lived your life, you went to the grocery store, you went to work, you drove to, it was rare that you would get any feedback, positive or negative. And when you did get negative feedback, it was very noticeable, right? If someone flips you off on the freeway, or if your boss fires you, or your spouse says, I don't like the way you chew, or so, it's rare. You might go months without ever getting any negative feedback, unless you're in an abusive situation, then that's a different scenario. But actually kind of related in that with an abusive relationship, you'll get X amount of negative feedback. Well, when you're a content provider, even if you're like me, in that people are really nice to me and I don't really talk about super controversial things, and the other, and yet the negative feedback will absolutely destroy me when people hate me, when people are angry at me, especially when it's a group of people. The other thing that I can look at is I have a lot of therapy under my belt, and I have age under my belt, and I have a lot of supportive people in my life, and my whole content is about trauma recovery and taking care of yourself and emotional awareness and loving yourself. So if little old me it is having this kind of reaction, now you could argue that it's my mild OCPD, or I have more trauma that I haven't recovered from than I realize, and all that is applicable. But every time I get an honest answer from other content providers, they will tell me that they have the same, if not much more, of the negative reaction to the negative reaction to them. And so many content providers will just quit. They'll just close their Twitter or close their YouTube account, So it's, and yet they'll say that they just don't want to deal with it anymore. What they often won't say is how hard it was for them. Because often when they say that, they get more pile on, right? They go, you're just playing the victim. And so, so I just don't think that we, as content providers, we're set up to handle it. And I don't think there's, because these two emailers are like, well, maybe look at it this way. Maybe that'll help. And I absolutely appreciate that, and I'll incorporate it. But I just don't think, it's sort of be like, well, if you're going to eat candy bars and ice cream all day, maybe if you just like exercised more, that will offset it. And it's like, no, it's just not physically and emotionally possible. There's nothing you can do to offset the effect, because you could argue that we evolved to respond very intensely to negative feedback, because when we were in our supposed natural state for 1 million years on the African Pleistocene savanna, we only saw 100 people, 150 people, and tribe cohesion was extremely critical for survival, and therefore stepping outside of the society and the culture and the tribe was a huge threat. And so we very much gave a lot of weight to any kind of negative feedback, because if we don't pay attention to it, we could be ostracized and kicked out of the tribe and die, right? And so we have this straight line from negative feedback to our distress and fear center that motivates us to comply or to react or to focus or ruminate or obsess. And when I'm on the internet and I'm getting, 1,000 comments and there's 2 that are very angry at me, my body just focuses in and ruminates and obsesses on those 2 comments. The other comments are getting in there and they're doing something to me, from an automatic sense of my emotional reactivity. But it's like if you're walking along and you see a sunset that's really pretty, you go, oh, that's a nice sunset. And you might have a warm feeling, right? Now, let's say you're walking along and all of a sudden a grizzly bear jumps out of the bushes at you. Well, these are 2 different emotional reactions, each evolving for different reasons. Each are automatic, right? We probably evolved a love for nature and for vistas and thus sunsets. And we definitely evolved, like all other animals that are prone to being eaten, like ourselves. We were absolutely eaten as, animals on the Pleistocene savanna. We were eaten regularly by big cats, particularly hyenas. And we have an intense automatic reaction to that bear. Well, when it comes to positive feedback, I'll stop and go, huh, that's nice. That feels good. But then when there's the 2, it's like the grizzly bear. It's all encompassing and there's no choice. And it just completely upends my entire stability for a while, Now, like I said, I'll allow for the possibility that I am extremely oversensitive. It's possible, but like I said, and it could be confirmation bias, but when I talk to other people, they have similar reactions, whether they're willing to admit it or not. And often they will admit it, but that's anyway. Let's take a break. We get back. There's another email. Right. This next email is from annual patron Danielle from BC. She says, I recently posted to a dating sub on Reddit about a funny conversation that happened to me on a dating app. Nothing I posted was a big deal, and I thought I could share it and gain a bit of levity or camaraderie with the other folks on the sub. However, what happened gave me a metaphorical whiplash. A number of commentators called me stupid, crazy, hysterical, and an anxious burnout who should immediately quit online dating. The worst part was feeling like I had to take on each comment and fight for my point of view to be seen and not distorted by their warped lens. Just chiming in here. Yeah, I absolutely can relate, Danielle. I'll reread this. The worst part was feeling like I had to take on each comment and fight for my point of view to be seen and not distorted by their warped lens. Yeah, Danielle, it's a perfect summary of a good portion of my life. Because so often I feel like people are angry at me. When people are upset at me online, and, I could be wrong about this in the moment, of course, but it feels to me, and I have reasons to make this conclusion, but again, it's self-serving, but I am frequently thinking you misunderstood me, or I misspoke, and or you're not giving me the benefit of the doubt, or you're reacting to someone in your personal life, and I am the target, even though I didn't do what that person did. And, there are very common traumas that people will go through. And when I trigger it, even though I'm not doing or saying or promoting the idea that they think I am, there will be a small group of people, those 50 people will be certain that I am the enemy, and they'll come after me, right? Sort of like with the trial, there was a group of people that were big Johnny Depp fans and had felt as though, as men who had been abused, they were, discounted by society and by people in their life, maybe even clinicians. And because I was asking questions and saying, I wonder what that's about, what Amber Heard is saying. That sounds like a fairly credible allegation that Johnny Depp kicked her on the plane. I remember there's one allegation where and there were witnesses that he was extremely intoxicated and extremely rageful. And there was like an audio recording or something, and that he had just hauled off and kicked her in the back while they were getting off the plane or something. I don't remember. But for me to say, well, there's a witness and there's enough corroborating evidence, because he himself will say that he suffered from a lot of alcohol addiction and drug addiction. So yeah, I could see that happening. For me to say that to the Johnny Depp fans was to them, me saying that their abuse didn't happen, right? That they weren't abused. And so they would come after me. And I would feel the same way, Danielle. I'd be like, what part of me saying, I don't know the situation, but here's what I've seen in my clinical work, what part of that did you not fucking understand? You're acting like I said something that I never said, or you're acting like I am discounting men being victims. Did I not just say 10 minutes earlier for about 15 minutes that men can be victims? Like, what's the problem here? What is happening? And so, I get it. So going on, Danielle. But the system... So you say the worst part is the feeling like I had to take on each comment and fight for my point of view to be seen and not distorted by their warped lens. But the system hid my replies because they had been downvoted 6 or more times. So just chiming in here, if you're not familiar, you can upvote or downvote comments. And apparently on this particular subreddit, this dating subreddit, if something is downvoted 6 or more times, the mods have apparently have a setting that says that the comment will be hidden, which I find to be interesting. And the subreddits that I look at, that doesn't happen, because you'll see a comment that'll be downvoted like 1,000 times and it's still visible. But anyway, I know that I seem naive on Reddit, but from what I've seen, this is nowhere near how bad the mobbing can be. Going on. For at least a week, I felt sick and shaken to think about this incident. So just chiming in, what Danielle is saying is that she posted on a dating subreddit about a funny conversation that happened while she was on a dating app. And all she was posting was just like, isn't this kind of funny? And probably like, boy, this guy, get a load of this guy that I met online, right? And in all likelihood, obscured the names of everyone and did it anonymously. And then apparently a lot of people took issue, or it pushed some button, or it was misunderstood, and a lot of people went after Danielle and were very angry. And it's all anonymous. In all likelihood, people don't usually post themselves on Reddit. And yet, Danielle is saying, for a week, I felt sick and shaken. Isn't that interesting? It's like, well, who cares? It's just a bunch of zeros and ones on Reddit. Like, this has no practical effect on your life. why do we feel sick and shaken? Well, because we evolved in the same way that we evolved to have a certain balance between fiber and sugars and salts and fats and all the other things. We evolved to have a certain balance of feedback and, or not balance of feedback. We evolved to be extremely ruminating and afraid when people, especially a group of people, are attacking us. We're supposed to pay attention to that, because if we don't, we might die out of rejection from the tribe. But it doesn't apply anymore, right? Because it's just some yahoos, maybe even a bot, that are people that are flung all over the earth, and in all likelihood will never actually see you. And if they did, they probably would never say what they're saying online to your face, because they would have more decorum in person, So it's like we intellectually understand that, but our bodies don't. Going on. I need to remind myself that Reddit is not a support group or a therapeutic community. It's a battleground. Just chiming in here. Yeah. So Danielle, you're saying, I need to remind myself in the future to not look to Reddit as a supportive environment, because sometimes it can turn on you. Yeah, I learned this a long time ago in a fairly mundane way. Like this is, I don't know, maybe this is a long time ago, but I was just making a list of movies that I liked, and it was a very boring post about, maybe it was like my favorite movies of last year and like 3 that I didn't like or something. And it wasn't mean or anything. There was no hot takes. I was just like, these are the movies I liked, and these are the ones, here's a few that I wasn't really into. And every comment was either criticizing or angry at me for having a movie that was too high on the list or too low on the list, or I didn't see this other movie, or clearly with this movie, Constellation, you're just a typical hipster from the city or whatever. It was just like, holy shit. At the very least, I thought people would just be bored with the post, but why not just say, interesting. Well, I liked that one better, or I kind of like that movie, but thanks for posting. No, everyone's just, it's like, what's happening? And this isn't like a political subreddit, it's just movies. It's just, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. And yet people would just go off. And I thought, what the, and this was early on in subreddit. This was like, I don't know, 15 years ago. It was a long time ago. And I posted it, and was kind of nervous. I was like, okay, here we go. I'm posting something. I'm no longer lurking on Reddit. Maybe 10 people will like it. Maybe 20 people will like it. I don't know. Let's see what happens. And I post it, and I check in, and the next day or something, or a few hours later, and there's all this. It's like, I'm not even joking. There wasn't a single neutral comment. It was all anger and criticism and ridicule. And I was like, okay, wow, that did not feel good. It was completely anonymous. No one knew who I was or where I lived or anything. And no one was threatening me or anything, but it was just zeros and ones. Who gives a shit? But it stuck with me, and I vowed to myself, I'm never doing something like this again. I'm never posting anything on subreddit ever again. And I haven't. I mean, occasionally I'll reply to people when I feel like there's a question, like on a psychology or therapy subreddit that's getting a little wonky. I'll chime in, or I'll just praise someone. I'll just be like, yeah, I agree, or something like that. But I have never posted anything on subreddit, and I look at Reddit all the time, at least once a day, for half an hour, 15 minutes. Sometimes I'll look at Reddit for a long time, Anyway, so, yeah. I don't know what to say. I guess by that evidence, I am more sensitive because clearly a lot of people are okay enough with occasionally that happening, because otherwise Reddit wouldn't exist, right? Because there's constantly people posting. So they must be less sensitive, right? Because they must run into that negativity, and yet they keep posting. I don't know. I don't know how. So now I'm talking myself backwards. And that's the debate in my mind, I guess. I mean, the thing that I think about is that when I make the content that I make is not impersonal. Like me posting about my favorite movies is not, when people criticize that, it wasn't an existential threat to me. It was just like, wow, I just made the world a worse place. Like no one got anything out of it. It just bothered people. So I clearly don't understand the tone or the venue or the circumstance to predict how people are going to receive something. So I just need to not be in the conversation. But when I post stuff about psychology and whatnot, on this podcast, I'm really putting myself out there. I'm being, vulnerable at times. I'm trying. It's my life's mission as a human being, not just as a content provider, but as a human being. My most important mission that I wake up every morning and think about is to try to make the world a better place, and specifically through this content that has to do with my expertise and my profession. And for people to be angry and to claim that I've harmed them because of that, it's a lot more difficult for me to handle, right? If I was posting, I don't know, movie content, if I was just like, I give Infinity War 4 out of 5 stars, and then people are like, oh my God, you're an asshole. It's just a movie. It wouldn't feel good, but it's different. There's something about, like when I think about other content providers who, they might play video games and have people watch, and people are like, oh my God, you're so stupid. That game is so dumb, or you don't know how to play that game, or I can't believe you didn't understand that one corridor that you could have gone down, and you just like, you don't even pay attention or something. I imagine in situations like that, it doesn't feel good, but it's also not like criticizing someone to their core the way that it can feel to me sometimes, because often people will be upset with me because they perceive me as having discounted a negative experience that they've had in the past. Like they experienced sexual assault, or they experienced abuse, or they experienced racism or sexism, and they believe that something that I said is discounting of their experience. And, like I said earlier, I might do that sometimes, and I have done that sometimes. It's not on purpose, of course. Sometimes it's out of ignorance or privilege or something. And feel free to, talk about it with me. But it's this leap, several leaps, and then eventually someone will comment, typical man. It's just you just completely like disregard the abuse that women experience because of X, Y, and Z. And it's just like, wow, what happened? What did I say? Who am I? Where am I? And then I feel like I can't trust being on the internet. That's what happened to me from the trial. It was so bad that when I turned on the microphone, I didn't feel safe. I literally felt afraid. The same way that an abuse victim will get tense as they're coming home from work because they know that their abuser is at the house. Or the way that you feel when you get in a car accident, and the next time you get in a car and you're shaking with fear because your body's like, wait, this is a bad scenario. Get out of the car, That's what it felt like to turn on the microphone, and I powered through it, but it affected the way that I would talk. I would talk in an extremely tentative manner, and I would make all these caveats and excuses, and I would steer away from certain topics. And after I would record, I didn't feel relaxed. I didn't feel good. I was just trying to survive. And I noticed that, and I really pushed myself to do a number of things. One was to reassure myself and talk about my feelings with people, and to also reach out to you, the listeners, and tell you what was going on with me so that you can respond and tell me that I am safe with you, that I am safe in your hands, and all those things over the span of about 12 months, I eventually got back to 90%. And then by today, I would say I'm at 98% or something. But anyway, going on with your email. Yeah, for at least a week, I felt sick and shaken to think about this incident. I need to remind myself that Reddit is not a support group. It's a battleground. In November 2022, you talked about the dark side of Reddit and your own personal experience being mobbed on there. I'd like to hear more, and perhaps from your listeners and others. Someone should be doing research about this. Thank you so much for what you've shared. It definitely has given me some relief and stigma reduction. End of email. Yeah, well, Danielle, what I was talking about, I will give a quick summary of, because I'm guessing some of you are like, yeah, Kirk, you've already talked about all this before. Because, as I'm talking about all this stuff, I'm like, I've talked about all this before. And I don't like to bore people with my same old man stories. And believe it or not, I will edit out huge portions of videos or podcast episodes where I'm like, ugh, you're telling that story again. And I'm okay with telling the story because clearly I haven't processed the feelings enough, and which makes sense to me. And by telling the story from different angles or with different people or with different energies over time, I'm slowly recovering. But I don't feel like I don't want to burden you with that. I would imagine it would be quite boring. I don't mind boring my wife. I mean, I don't like boring her, but it'll happen in a marriage. But I don't want to bore the audience anyway. So I won't bore you with this whole story again. But for those who maybe didn't hear it or forgot it or something, or are new here. Well, first off, what I'll say to you, Danielle, is I'm sorry that you went through that. It sounds like I know how you feel, and it's the sort of anxiety and pain and turmoil that it's hard to get sympathy for, because when you talk to other people about it, they're just like, what are you worried about? Why do you care? Because in all likelihood, they've never been through it. But talking about what I believe I was talking about as you're referencing. So in the summer-ish of 2020, so I'm pretty new to the reaction video thing, and I was reacting to Darcy from 90 Day Fiancé episode. And, when I'm reacting, I'm just reacting off the cuff. I don't have any prepared notes or anything. And so I said something along the lines of, I was talking about trauma, and I accidentally, purely by accident, I had the sentences that communicated something that I don't believe, that if you have trauma below, quote unquote, a certain level, then by definition, you can't claim to be traumatized. It was something like that. And I think it was sexual trauma I was talking about. It was it wasn't this, but it was something like, look, if someone, I don't know, date rapes you or something, or grabs you on the street, then you don't deserve to call yourself traumatized or something. It wasn't that severe, but it was something like that. It's obviously not something that I hold. And I assume that a large portion of my audience who knew me from the podcasts heard that and either thought I must have heard that wrong, or thought, oh, he misspoke, or at the very least, there's a bigger story there that I would understand, But at the time, I'm brand new to Reactivate, and the vast majority of the viewers on YouTube just discovered me. There's a good number of you listening right now that probably discovered me in the beginning, or that, the beginning or around midpoint of 2020, because that's when I was really, so, earlier I said I was at the height of my fame in the middle of 2022, which was during the trial, the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial. And that's one way of putting it. But in terms of the numbers, like the number of viewers, the number of views that I was getting was at its highest during the pandemic, from like April through September or something of 2020. So it was a lot of people, and 99.9% of them were brand new people. So when they heard me say that, they thought that was my position, which, makes sense. And so Stacy at the time, she would monitor the comments quickly. I would look at the comments, but Stacy would see them like right away. And so we were doing one of our walks with the dog, and we would talk about work and stuff, and she would say, so there's some people on one of the, and I posted 2 or 3 episodes a day, and so it was just one of the episodes, and one of the episodes, people were saying, oh, people seem to be upset about something that you said, and it seemed to be you were implying that certain people can't claim to be traumatized or something like that. And my initial response was, well, I don't hold that position, and anyone that knows me knows that I don't hold that position, so I must have misspoke, I'm guessing, but no big deal. People will figure it out. I assume that, and which is often my approach. I'm often just like, yeah, I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. They'll come around, or it'll blow over, or I don't know. And so the next day comes around. I don't know the exact chronology, but at some point later, Stacy comes to me again, and she's like, yeah, that thing I was telling you about? Well, it's gotten worse, and there's a lot of people that are talking together in the comment section about how horrible you are because of what you said. And I'm like, oh, really? Wow, that's new. I mean, it might have literally been the first time that anything like that had ever happened with me. And so I'm like, well, what are they talking about? And so Stacy takes me to her office, and she shows me the clip of me having a brain fart and saying the wrong thing. And I watch it, and from my memory, the little clip was ambiguous. I remember thinking, I was like, that's what they're talking about? Because I'm not really saying it clearly, and it's pretty clear that I'm stuttering or fumbling, or because it wasn't like I said a very articulate sentence. It was like a jumbled, stuttered mess that had come out. But if you looked at it from a certain way, a certain verbatim way, it was understandable that people saw it in a very negative light. And so I said, oh, well, I think a lot of people would just figure that's a brain fart, but clearly there's a lot of people that are interpreting it in this really awful way, a way that I would never want anyone to think, let alone me think, And so I don't know who suggested it, but Either I did or Stacy did, but Stacy edited it out. One of the things you can do on a YouTube video of your own is you can edit after you post it. You can take things out. You can't put things in, but you can take things out. And so she, took that little snippet and deleted it. And the video, stayed up and everything. And we thought, okay, just move on with our lives. And, we did, and everything. Because, every day there were 2 or 3 videos, and there were lots of other kind of comments and lots of other things happening in our lives and at work and stuff. And so I just moved on with my life from my memory and figured everything would be okay. Well, a year later, I am in South Seattle or Renton, Tukwila area, and I am buying a carpet pad for my office. It's like a soundproof carpet pad. And I, because Stacy, I don't want to bother her while I'm yammering or while me and Berto are yammering. And you can get these really heavy carpet pads that do help to muffle sound going through the floor. And so I was buying this pad, and I think, waiting for the warehouse guys to bring it out or something. And I'm, scrolling through Reddit or something. And I come across this really big thread on Reddit, probably on the 90 Day Fiancé subreddit, is just a guess. And it was a year later about that event, about the flub that I said. And the thread happened a year earlier, and the post and the thread was locked, after a certain amount of time. I think there are settings with the moderators in certain subreddits where they'll say, after a certain number of days or months, the post will become locked and you can't comment anymore. I'm not sure why that's all, I don't think that's always the case, but anyway. So it was locked, and I'm reading it, and it was so traumatizing, literally traumatizing to read. Fight or flight, heart racing, dysregulation, fear, anger, demoralization, an urge to just pack it up, just shut it down, shut down the podcast, shut down the YouTube channel. It was a lot of people. It was at least dozens, if not hundreds of people. It wasn't just like 5, 15 people. It was a lot of people. And from my memory, and it's pretty burnt into my brain, because, I'm reading it. This is 2021. So this is 3 years ago, right? It's still burnt in my brain. And what they were saying, so, one person posted, this guy said this thing, right? And then there's a couple people that are saying things like, yeah, I can't believe that he said that. That's just like so harmful. And what kind of I worry for his clients, for him, there's typical kinds of things people say. But then there's a lot of other conversation happening beyond that initial conversation in this thread, in this post on Reddit, from people that don't even know really who I am and clearly didn't watch the video. And they're talking about me though. They're like, oh, I've heard about him. I haven't watched any of his videos, but that doesn't surprise me because and then it just blossoms from there, where people are now just making shit up about me. And I'm reading it, I'm like, and there's upvotes and there's replies that are agreeing, and it's a really long thread, like really long, like longer than I probably could tolerate looking at, all about me, and 90% of it was just patently false. And I'm like, what is happening? And I immediately I wanted to reply. I wanted to one, I wanted to say, yeah, I did say something stupid. I didn't mean to. I flubbed. I don't believe that to be true. But that's if we're going to talk about cancel culture, one of the premises, and there's a lot of elements of cancel culture that is actually positive for our society, when you're talking about your Charlie Roses or your Harvey Weinsteins. But there's also a lot of it that, of course, when you have whole groups of mobs of people, you're going to have some mistakes that are made, right? And one of the elements that maybe more so back then, hopefully not so much anymore, is that when maybe particularly a man in power says something that is problematic, it's assumed that that's the tip of the iceberg, and that the iceberg is monstrous in size. And so I think that's what was happening, was that they thought that, and the fact that I had deleted it, right, was just a slam dunk indication that I was guilty, that I was trying to hide it. And I'm thinking, what is happening? And so that element of cancel culture was at play, where if he said that, then it snuck through, and all of his talk is a deception, one big lie. He acts like he cares about the traumatized, but look what he lets slip. And underneath is this nefarious, evil, force of boogeyman-ness or something. It was, and it was assumed, and it was crowds of people. And I wanted to get into that thread, and meanwhile, my heart is pounding and I'm freaking out, and the warehouse guys are probably looking at me going like, okay, we're here with the pad. Like, why is this guy staring at his phone and shivering in his car? And I wanted to tell the original poster, I wanted to say, yeah, I said that. I didn't actually mean to say it. And I said it, and I'm so sorry that it made you feel as though I was saying that people who have been traumatized, they don't count. I can see how people would have received it that way, and I should have been more careful, or I should have edited that out. I should have reviewed, but I want to tell you that I don't believe that, and I've said many things otherwise. And it's fine that you've never consumed that part of my content. I've been podcasting for, by that point, 13 years or something. But I get it, and I'm sorry. And then if people want to say you're still an asshole, well, it's like, well, at least I got a chance to be a part of the conversation, But when you have like hundreds of people talking shit about you, and it's spiraling, and you can't do anything about it. You can't even try, And then to the people that were saying shit that was just made up about me, I wanted to say, I think you're mixing me up with someone else, because I've never done anything like that. I don't know what you're talking. Am I forgetting something? And again, if people would have said, oh, typical, he probably deleted it, at least I would go to bed thinking, well, at least I was part of the conversation. To be left out of that conversation, to be not given a chance, it's like having a trial where your life is on the line, and a judge and jury are there, and they don't tell you that the trial happened. That's what it feels like. And then a verdict is made, and you were never able to defend yourself. They didn't even tell you that the trial date was set. They didn't even tell you that there were charges against you. That's what it feels like, it's awful. It was very, and my body was panicking for days, if not weeks. And I'm still rocked because of that. And I've had to process and take a lot of deep breaths and cry and I don't know, have a lot of defenses around it, have systems in place I have experimented with a lot of different approaches as a content provider. And one of my current system involves me not actually looking at the comments right away. That I would have like I'll ask Alina or Stacy to kind of glance at the comments and tell me if it's safe, and then once they tell me it's safe, then I'll go, They don't like read all the comments and tell me all the, they'll just say, yeah, it looks like it's good. And then if they tell me that it's not safe for me, I might ask why. And if they tell me, well, they're kind of upset with you because of this and that, like, it doesn't get under my skin as much if it's sort of summarized, and I can still respond to it. I could still go to the video and put a comment and pin a comment at the top and say like, oh, I'm sorry about this and that. And then it's still hard for me, but not as hard, because what I was doing in the past is I would just sort of, when I had time, I would just go to the comment section, or I would just go to the emails, or I would just go to the comment section on Instagram or something. And again, 95, 98% of the time, everything was fine. But every once in a while, there would just be this dagger through the heart, and I would be ready for it. And I don't know if there's ever a chance to be ready for it. And it would just completely ruin my day, if not several days. And then there'd be this cycle, kind of like an abuse cycle in a way, where I would retreat from the comment section, and I would be hurt and crying and dysregulated and angry and demoralized and saying I want to quit. And then I would avoid the comment section, and I would try to just recover. And then I would recover, and I would go through a period of time where I was like, okay, don't just spontaneously go to the comment section, or make sure you ask someone if it's safe, or that episode probably got a lot of interesting debate comments going on, so don't look at the comments on that one. And there'd be a period of that, and then I would forget about the bad times, and I would slowly start, to think, I can look at the comments, and I would, and everything would be fine. And then I'd do it again, and everything would be fine. And I'd do it again. And then all of a sudden, wham, aluminum bat to the head. And I'd be like, oh, that's right. I did this over and over again until, and I still do to some extent. I still do. I less often, because I have a lot more systems in place. But, and I want to be clear, 99%, if not more, of the comments and of you listening right now are not only just neutral and non-harmful, but you're very kind. And each one of you who emailed in, thank you so much for what you've shared. It's definitely given me some relief from the stigma. That's what Danielle says. And then, anonymous patron, thank you so much. I very much appreciate your hard work, that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying that I'm in this whirlwind of hatred, or that woe is me, and that no one is supporting me, and that the commenters are not thinking about my feelings. They are, because I talk about them, but it's still, it's weird. It's weird. I'll just give one more example. I was watching Love is Blind. I think it was like season maybe 5 or something. It was the one with Taylor and I can't remember the guy's name. The guy who always had the American flag on himself. Anyway, and I was watching this one scene where Taylor and American flag guy were in bed talking about something that was tense and conflictual, and in their conversation was kind of long, and there were a lot of moments where I had a reaction to, and I would watch 10 seconds of the show, and then I would be triggered to say something, be like, oh wow, okay, well that's interesting, and then I would yammer, And then I would get back to the show and I'd watch another 10 seconds and I'd talk for a while. But there was something about those little snippets that was causing me to yammer a lot. I don't remember why. Maybe it was for dumb reasons, but a lot of people, and for good reason, were really wanting to see my reaction to a particular thing that happened later on in that conversation when they were in the bed. And what'll happen is that when I'm watching these scenes, if I end up there's the scene when they're in bed and they're talking, and if my total reaction to that scene in the bed is like an hour and a half, then I don't post like an hour and a half episode, because for many people that's just way too long. It's just, too big of a time commitment. So I'll break it up into, say, 3 half-hour episodes, So I'll have bed fight number 1 and bed fight number 2 and then bed fight number 3, posts, right? And so my video would end before I got to that point. And people would be in the comment section and say like, "Oh my God, Kirk, you're killing me with your yammering. You gotta let it play longer because something's happening." And from the tone of the comment, an outsider, someone not me, would read that as a loving frustration, right? Like, "Oh, Kirk, we love your videos and we can't wait to see you react to this one scene. And, it's frustrating, but we're in it to win it," or whatever. But to me, and there were a lot of upvotes, 50 upvotes or something. And when I read that, it just, I have an insecurity about yammering, which is weird. I could yammer for a long time about that whole thing. It's just like, there's a lot of nuances there. I do have a problem, but I'm also a podcaster and a YouTuber. I'm paid to yammer, but what's too much yammering, and how do you please everyone with the yammering? Because, I'll get people criticizing me for not yammering enough. They'll be like, "I can't believe you didn't talk about that one thing." And, and a lot of people have a very specific thing, or groups of people have a very specific thing that if I don't touch on, they'll get really hurt and angry at me, So I am doing my best, to thread the needle, and I know that I'm not going to please everybody, but as long as I do it in a certain way, usually things go well. But anyway, so I'm reading this comment, and the comment was, by all appearances, it was, maybe a little on the mean side, but definitely not the sort of comment that you're going to get where you would think, ouch, right? Like people saying that I am pro sexual assaults, this is just someone going like, "Ah, God, you got to watch longer because we can't wait to see that scene where you react to." And there's just something about coming upon a criticism that is supported by dozens of people, and you're just sort of like walking into the room, and the conversation has happened and the conversation is over, and you've just now arrived. There's just something about that. There's just something about, because if I saw that comment when it first was posted, it would have just been one person, right? And then I would have replied and said like, "Oh, really? Oh, sorry." I do that sometimes. And then if people liked it, it would feel different. But there's just something about walking into a room after everyone has decided that you are, I don't know, there's something wrong with you, or you're ridiculous in a way, or you're frustrating, or you talk too much. And the conversation is over, and you're now walking in, and everyone's looking at you because they just got done talking about you, and they're leaving the room now. And you're like, "Wait, how come you didn't call me? Can I make up for it?" But they've made up their mind. They've moved on, They've made the comment. they've liked the comment, they've replied to the comment and agreeing with the comment, and they're long gone. They're not coming back. They've watched the video. They're not just sitting there watching the comment, waiting for me to reply. They make the comment and they move on with their life, and they don't come back. And even if I do reply, they probably won't get the notification, or they won't regard it or something. So I'm just out. I'm out of the loop about me. And it's awful, And I'm sure there are reverse versions of this where I'm talking about you like I'm responding to your email, and I make the wrong assumption, or I am critical of you, and you're like, oh, wait, I have a response to that, but you can't because you're left out of the conversation. There's this inherent, I think, triggering nature of this asynchronous communication that you and I have. And I just wish there was a way to not have it that way. At the very least, I think in the interim, what I see people doing is they're just a lot more careful in terms of what they say to me, right? And I'm more careful about what I say to you. And I think that works. I think if everyone does that, and a lot of people will, then, or at the very least, there's a back and forth. Like I think with that one, it wasn't just that one comment. It was like several comments from different angles within the same week of people saying he yammers too much, or the episodes are too short, Like it's one thing to see those comments. It's another thing to have those comments float to the top because they get the most replies and the most upvotes, And it just feels like I'm trying. I'm trying, and I don't know what to do because some people want them longer and some people want them shorter, and I can only react spontaneously. I don't know what's going to happen later on in this scene, and some scenes are actually really short, and if I don't react within a certain amount of time, the scene might be over, and then I'm like, oh, wait, so the scene's over. Okay, now I have to react. So sometimes I chime in because I don't know if it's going to end soon, that kind of thing. But I'm trying my best, and I'm not trying to annoy people, And it was just, and all the comments they weren't trolling, they weren't overly mean, but it was the volume of them. And then I just kind of lost it and actually replied to the last one that I had read, even though that person was quite honestly maybe the nicest one. And I said something like, look, I'm trying my best and I hear you, but when I hear this kind of feedback and so many upvotes, it hurts my feelings because I put a lot of effort into this, and it's hurtful to hear people say to a reaction video of a therapist that provides clinical opinions about what he's watching to shut up. It's not nice. And I do talk too much, and I am sorry, and I'm working on it, and whatever, I mean, actually my reply to their comment was actually a lot more mundane and diplomatic than that. But, then there was all these comments of people saying like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Kirk. That's not what I meant, and the original commenter like even emailed in and said like, I'm that person. I'm so sorry. I can be a little sharp sometimes and I shouldn't have said that. I'm so sorry. I hope. And they were super, super nice. And I felt bad because I made someone feel like shit because of my sensitivities, but I think it's okay. It's okay that I can't do anything immediately about whatever level of sensitivity I have. But if everyone just understands each other as best as we can, and we incorporate that into our decision-making as we are commenting, as we are upvoting comments, then I think everything works out. And it has, honestly. I'm far less triggered today than I was a couple years ago. I can't remember the last time that dysregulation feeling, that post-trauma feeling that some of you are very aware of, unfortunately. I would probably have that at least once or twice a month. that would throw me into a tailspin for at least a few days. I can't remember the last time that happened, maybe like 4 months ago, but that's just a guess. I mean, I had a mild version of it last week, but it was pretty mild, you know? So it is a lot better because of you and because of me and because of Alina and because of Stacy. So it's, you know, there's a way. And I think if we apply this to the entire internet, as I think everyone is, not because they're learning from me and my podcast, but because I think we as a society are just learning how to understand. And I think that it all depends on empathy, right? If, you know, when people were first making content, the audience would treat those content providers as anonymous, famous people. As time has gone on, we've learned from even super famous people, but particularly content providers, that they're not this inhuman figure on our phone. They are a human being that can be destroyed by a comment. And so we incorporate that because we now know and we have empathy. We had empathy before, we just didn't know to have empathy for that. And I think as we learn more and more about our experiences and more content providers are willing to be vulnerable and talk about them, I think we're moving down the road and it's getting better. And I want to make content until I keel over. And so, me being able to do that has to do with all of this, you know, the systems and you and my own recovery and you know, and it's kind of weird, you know, I'll get, like last week when I was having a mini version of this, there were some DMs on Patreon that were really thoughtful people, you know, saying like, hey, I just wanted to reach out and say that I really appreciate you. And I found you a few years ago. And since then, like I've gone to therapy, and I just want to let you know that you're making a positive difference in the world. And I replied to them, thank you for this. I truly needed to hear that just now. Some of you might be listening that I said that. There were I think 2, and it was like, oh, and that happens a lot, you know. It's where I'm like, oh, thank God that I got this DM, because it's so easy to be derailed, you know, even though people aren't even necessarily saying that. You know, the mini version of my mild trauma from last week, you know, I won't go into the details, but the criticism wasn't like over the top, you know, and it wasn't like a mob of people really. I mean, not really, but anyway. And so, and if I'm going to be on the internet, then this is going to happen. And if I'm going to get into dicey, sensitive topics, and if I'm going to be vulnerable, and if I'm going to put my heart into this, then I'm going to get hurt, and it's going to happen. It's happened in the past. It's going to happen in the future. And I wouldn't want to live any other way. No pain, no gain. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.